Lastly, this is typically the thing that I see most often being decided on first. And it's actually the last thing that you need to think about on your property if you've got bare property. So, I mean, a lot of the properties, I have to admit, a lot of the properties that I see already have homes and barns, and so we end up having to do retrofit around them. And things definitely do not work as well as they could if we consider all of those things from the beginning. What do you think the first thing people think about when it comes to designing their house? Yeah, what their neighbors are going to think about it, actually. People build not even based on what they want. They based on what they think society deems as normal. Okay, and so we end up with all sorts of really weird things showing up in homes. Like right now, the trend is kind of emerging back again that all of our homes have to have these cantilevers on them. These little, because we're building all these really tiny infills, the only way you can make a really rectangular lunchbox look interesting is by having these little tiny projections coming out of the house. Because it makes it visually interesting compared to just a rectangular thin box. The first thing that you need to think about is the envelope. Okay? We can do piles of stuff down the road to deal with electricity. Okay? There's all sorts of innovative stuff that we can do to reduce electricity consumption, LED lights, daylighting in the home. But there's very few things that we can do that have the kind of yield that envelope does. So let me give you an example of that. Passive house from Austria, Germany, it's kind of evolved from both places, is a design methodology to design any building on any part of the planet. And for this particular part of the planet, we can design buildings that use 90% less energy. So let's put that into perspective. 1,000 square foot home, you guys can all picture 1,000 square feet, can run off of a hair blow dryer. So that means that you can actually run your house off of photovoltaic panels, so panels that produce electricity. Okay? It also means that in the worst possible situation, minus 30, minus 40, somewhere in that range, your house will never go below zero. I don't know about you, but that makes me feel pretty good. The thing that worries me the most about this province, and actually Canada as a whole, is like we have a pretty resilient, I would say that our natural gas grid is actually anti-fragile, mostly so, within reason, given, if we don't think about overall reserves, I would call it anti-fragile because there's so many different branches that I can't even think of a time that there's been a natural gas outage unless somebody's hit a main artery pipeline or even a pipeline going to my house. So natural gas is very resilient as long as we don't run out of it. Electricity is less resilient. Multiple times in the last 10 years, we've almost had complete grid outages, one of which was actually in the winter time. And actually, if you think about your house, most homes require electricity and natural gas to keep the home warm. Okay, so both the electrical grid and the gas grid have to be working. Luckily, the gas grid's pretty reliable, but the electrical grid, if it ever went out in an ice storm, we'd have a lot of homes that would have freezing pipes, and people wouldn't have enough heat to keep their homes warm. So I actually worry about how homes are heated more than I worry about how homes are lit or powered. And it's the envelope that makes all the difference. So to get to passive house standards, and this is where a lot of contractors will call you absolutely bonkers for doing this, but generally in this climate, we're talking like 15-inch thick walls. Okay, so lots of room for plants on your windowsills. And then we're talking about properly glazing the south surface of the wall and not glazing the north surface of the wall. These are not ugly homes. I mean, Germans live in them. They're very, very sensitive about aesthetics. And so we can make them look really, really beautiful. But envelope is the most important thing. Next is heat supply. And so this is another kind of thing. Mostly this is an issue with men, not with women. But men love overly complicated systems that they can take their guy friends down to and go, ho, 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 and look at them. Anybody here have heat pumps? Okay, good. Heat pumps are a perfect example of that. So you can put $30,000 into a heat pump system. I'm not saying all heat pump systems are bad. There's definitely ways to do heat pumps really effectively. But I'd much rather see that $30,000 invested into envelope, because once you do that, heating the house is very, very simple. Okay? Most passive homes can't actually put a full-size fireplace into them. Why? So they'll overheat. So they actually have to put little tiny marine fireplaces that take little Kingston briquettes to heat the house up. It's like heating a giant house with a little mouse heater. They're amazing. The big disadvantage is you don't have that nice, beautiful, aesthetic fireplace to look at, which is always the thing that I think about, because I love sitting in front of a fire. Next, we think about power systems. So once we've got the space designed, we're actually going to have a much clearer picture of how much power we're going to need to keep that thing lit. And if we do our job right, we can actually create rooms that are very well lit and rooms that are not very well lit. Typically, bedrooms, we're going to want to have less daylighting in than the living rooms that we live in. And a lot of the passive house framework actually dictates where windows actually can go. And so it's a pretty holistic framework. Most people think about power systems before they think about envelope. So it's actually third on the list. And then the next piece is really important as well. It's how to integrate the house with the landscape. So we've talked about water, access, and structures. So we're integrating the buildings or the structures that we place onto the property. And by the way, structures can include homes, but there are also things like gardens, food forests, livestock systems. Anything where we actually have to place a structure on the landscape is considered to be a structure. And so we can get a lot of benefit by doing water access structures, but then we can actually look at integration of the home within the landscape relative to elevation. So I was speaking, what was your name? Dave. Speaking to Dave just before the talk started tonight, and he's noticed on his property that because he's kind of more in a mid-slope, he's actually located in a thermal belt. Okay, a thermal belt is in a location where an inversion naturally occurs in a landscape, and that's exactly where you want your house. Why wouldn't you put your house in the warmest part of the landscape? So the coldest parts are generally at the bottom and at the top. Right in the middle is a sweet spot. We get better food production there, we have lower heating bills, and generally our life is a heck of a lot easier. Where do you think most people place their home? Based on view. So if your holistic context says view is absolutely the most paramount thing in your life, you will pay the price forevermore in heating and comfort for that view. But we don't think about that because we just pump more natural gas into the building to try and keep it elevated a little bit more. Or if you have to have that view site, you're going to end up paying it in the width of your envelope. And you'll pay it in maintenance on the house because wind is damaging to a home. I met a couple, actually I met a number of couples who were building an eco-village in southern Alberta. They should have sold the property to the wind farm because, and like this is when you know that you're heading down in a wrong direction. They were already building before I got there, and I'm like, oh yeah, so what are you guys building? And they said, well, we hired an architect and we looked at the wind loading on this site, and the only building we could put up that we would feel confident about in terms of it standing up was a steel frame building. And so I'm like, okay, so you're southern Alberta, it gets to minus 35 here, you're looking at 150 kilometer peak winds. You're building a building out of a material that has a high conductivity, so all the energy we pump into the house is going to get sucked out just as quick as it goes in. And this is an eco-village. The only building that made sense on that property, if they were absolutely insistent on it, would be an earth-sheltered building. Okay, so that's an example of integrating a building into the landscape. It's the only building that would take away the wind, because wind actually will increase energy consumption in a building by 50%. So again, we don't think about shelter belts because we have natural gas. But shelter belts are absolutely crucial to creating a building that doesn't constantly lose its energy. We can put as much insulation into a wall as we want, but the amount of energy a building loses is relative to two things, the temperature and wind speed. So we all know about wind chill. Wind chill is how cold something feels, and it's a function of those two things, temperature and wind speed. So the best thing we can do in terms of landscape integration with regard to our envelope is creating shelter with either a shelter belt or by placing it strategically into the landscape. Another client, before they called me, bought their property and built a road. The road's not the bad part, but when you think about proper integration points at the beginning, there's so much opportunity to create efficiencies down the road. So we love in this country to complain about the cold. Okay? Everybody complains about the cold. And I can't stand it because the cold is one of our best assets. It keeps disease down. If you've ever been to a tropical country, refrigeration is super challenging. And if you leave something out on the counter, it's guaranteed that it's going to go rotten in a very short period of time, and it's going to make people sick. So one of the largest energy consumers in a home is the fridge, okay, or your refrigeration needs, especially if you're running some sort of a farm operation or you've got lots of food coming off. Well, we have this beautiful climate where we get really cold in the winter and really warm in the summer. And so before building a road, you can actually put in earth tubes or different heat and cold or cool harvesting devices. So we can actually freeze the driveway solid during the winter time, which preheats the air before it comes into the house. Okay, so you take minus 40 air, run it through the ground. What temperature do you think the ground is? 4 degrees. So instead of heating your air from minus 40 to plus 20, let's let the ground do the work. This is the smart man's geothermal system. Very few moving parts. Now you've got this driveway full, that absolutely chocker block full of ice. What can we do with that in the summertime? Yeah, why not run an earth fridge? For the cost of a small solar fan, we can use that integration point on the landscape to provide our preheating. So all summer long, we're preheating the ground for the winter, and all winter, we're cooling it for the summer. Now, if the house is designed properly, you've got the right envelope, you've got the right eaves, you've got the right windows, we'd never need an air conditioner. So all that coolth can go into an earth fridge to keep something, to keep your food cold or whatever it is that you're trying to store. And so on and on. We have all sorts of integration points on the property that we can talk about, but integrating with the property is going to give you key strategies to help you to create a property that is anti-fragile, that can buttress itself against chaos. Chaos is the only thing that's normal on this planet. Change is the only thing that's constant. And then finally, the last thing that we look at is aesthetic. Okay? This is when we put the lipstick on the pig. And if we do a good job, it looks really good. In fact, I love to say that sustainability should be absolutely invisible. Okay? It's starting to become a little bit more trendy to have sustainable features on your home, but why not make it invisible? I mean, that's one of, I think, Mac's biggest success stories is that they make their technology very intuitive. You don't really know what's going on in the back there, but it just works. It works all the time. It's almost bulletproof. At least when Steve Jobs was running the company, things are kind of going in a different direction now. But I think our landscape should be like that. I think our landscapes, I think our homesteads, I think our acreages should actually be net positive time assets. Work is a failure in design. That's not to say that your acreages won't require labor, but generally when you're working really, really hard at something and it's a very meaningful task or repetitive task, there's generally an element missing in the system. And that's where integrated design and proper placement are really important. Yeah, so that's basically it in a nutshell. I've left some time here so that we can ask some questions. Are there any